Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Paul Perdue, and I am a nerd, an infrastructure nerd to be exact. And today you are attending our June 2010 virtual user group meeting, which we affectionately call the Watercooler. Our topics today are how to get a non-client related deposit onto your deposit slip. Oh, let's say somebody paid their rent, or you got a refund from Office Max, or the court refunded a court cost or something like that. The client didn't pay you the money. How do you make that show up in your consolidated deposit slip so that you don't have to remember to reconcile it separately, even though it shows up as one entry along with all the other client payments? Mary Jo will talk about that. I am going to talk about how to schedule and set up non-human entities in PracticeMaster. Things like conference rooms, projectors, screens, groups of people like the estate planning group, the attorneys, the paralegals, the staff, so that you can then schedule those things so that you can know not only that Bob and Joe are available on Tuesday at 1 o'clock, but also the conference room is available. And then we have a special surprise revelation from Mary Jo at the end. So before we start, I do want to go through some housekeeping. I want to tell you that over on the right side of your screen is a box that looks something like this. You may have already collapsed it. If you have, it means you know what you're doing and you've been here before. But if not, jutting off to the left of the big box is a little box, and in it are some icons. And the top icon is a button that looks like arrows pointing to the right. If you click this button with the arrows pointing to the right, it will collapse that big box and get it out of the way. And that arrow pointing to the right button will turn into an arrow pointing to the left button. And if you want to get that big box back, this big box, you just point that arrow pointing to the left button, and it'll bring the box back up. Now, why would you want to bring the box back out once you've gotten rid of it and can see my screen? Because you want to ask a question and you're shy. If you have a question and you're shy, you simply go here under questions, type a question, and hit send. And Mary Jo or I will notice the question, and we will pose the question to whoever is presenting at the moment. If you are not shy and don't want to merely type a question, but you want to ask a question, you can click this button that looks like a hand with an arrow in front of it, and that is, you guessed it, raising your hand. We will notice that your hand is raised. We will unmute your microphone or your telephone. We will ask you your question. We will answer it, make sure we get it answered, and then we'll mute you again so that you can continue eating your potato chips or Doritos or whatever snack food you are eating. So, without any further ado, I'm going to press a few buttons here, get the general ledger screen up, and I'm going to turn things over to Mary Jo.
Hello, everyone. I'm going to talk today a little bit about deposit slips. In prior webinars, we have went over the function of the deposit slip and why we go ahead and create those in our general ledger. And I'll just do a quick recap. Most of the time, when you enter a payment over in tabs for any of your clients, they come into your general ledger and they hit your bank account and the fee account that you've designated as single entry. So you might have 10 payments that come in that day, and you'll have 10 entries over in your operating account in your general ledger that will equal whatever it is that that deposit was. And you know, it's not a problem. All the money's going over there and everything is good. But when you get your bank statement, you don't see those fees listed out individually. You see them as one deposit that went into the bank that day. So we've taught everyone how to use our deposit slip feature by coming in here to the Journal Entries tab, clicking on the deposit slip, and you can create a deposit slip for that day's deposit. And here's a couple that have already been prepared. If I look at 11-3s, I can see that that consisted of 2 payments, and those came in. So that is what the purpose of the deposit slip is to group those together and then put that as one entry on the reconciliation screen. So you will see instead of 10 entries, deposit slip number 100, and it consists of those 10 entries, and it equals whatever that amount is. What do you do when you have an extra check that comes in that's not a client payment? You have a refund from Office Max, or the Bureau of Workers' Comp sent you a refund check. What do you do with those checks? normally you would go in and you'd go ahead and you'd make that manual journal entry over here, but they still show up as a separate entry on the reconciliation screen. So you'll have your deposit slip that you created for all of your client funds that came in, client payments, but you have this loan deposit out there that you have to remember at the end of the month or the middle of the following month, where did that one come from? Oh, yeah, that went with this deposit over here, and you're trying to match those up. Well, I'm not sure if you're aware, but I'm going to show you today that you can include that miscellaneous deposit on that deposit slip. And it's very easy. You're going to go ahead and create your journal entry just like you would for any other manual journal entry for a check that comes in. So I'm going to quickly just make one here. And I'm going to, like Paul said, you might have an attorney that pays you rent or something, and you want to go ahead and record that. So I'll go ahead and put that in here. Save that. I'm just going to choose another account to do it on the other side here. I don't know if we've got anything. I'll just pick something. It doesn't matter. Whatever your expense account would be, we'll go ahead and just make that, of course, I'm not there, office rent. And we will save that. So here's your entry that's coming in. And it would help if I make it my credit. There we go. Okay. So I've got my entry here balanced and ready to go. There we go. And I'm going to save that. And this is how I would normally create my entry. And I would just save it, and it would be out there on its own. But if I come in and I simply go to my operating account side here, and I mark this as a receipt, I can come in, I can even give it, tell it whether it's cash or check or credit card, whatever, however I receive that money. And then I go ahead and I save that. When I go back over to my deposit slip now, and I want to create a new deposit slip, when I come in to choose my recipient, you'll see that now I've got that rent out there, and I can see it was a check payment, and I can choose that. So I might have these two clients here that paid, because I've got the reference number here, and so I can just check those off. And then I can also go ahead and I can check off that rent payment that came in. And then now my deposit will equal the actual amount that I took to the bank. So any of those extra checks that come in that aren't client-related, by simply checking a receipt on the operating side of that journal entry, they will show up here and be available to combine into one deposit slip. And then when I reconcile, I will see that $20,625 on the reconciliation, which will match whatever my bank statement said I got for deposit that day. One other thing while I'm in here, when you select recipients, it defaults to the cash and checks that came in for the client or whatever receipts you have done. You can also switch between here, and most of the time, if you wanted to create a deposit slip for your credit cards, you would do that separately, because those are usually deposited in a separate automatic deposit from the credit card company. But you can actually come in here and you can group those, because your particular company may group them in a batch. So at the end of the day, if you had 5 credit card payments that came in, you may want to come in here and group those into one so that you can reconcile them that way. One other thing on here, if you come in and you have, if you mark a payment as a payment from client funds, and you want to show that coming into the bank, that won't show up under your cash and checks. It would be under the client funds section. So the one thing that people I find don't know is that you can combine these all together. So if I had a couple of payments here that were cash and checks, and I had one that day that was a client funds, I can also come over here to the client funds and I could check that as well, and it would go ahead and combine those together. I don't have to do these separately. For whatever reason, if you did have a credit card payment that came in and you do need to record it with this deposit, you can even record that way as well and have the total deposits go over on that slip. So that is just a little something extra there that you can come in and combine cash and checks, client funds, or credit cards without having to do a separate deposit slip. One other way that some of our clients do this to keep track of the non-client funds, like for example, the rent check. If you've got, Attorney Smith down the hall that always has to pay you rent every month, you can also set him up as a client in tabs, and you can, whatever kind of an account you want to set that up as, administrative or rent or whatever for his matter or work description. You can then bill him the $500, whether you print the bill or not, and then receive the payment through the client payment screen, and then that will also show up over there as well. So if you have a regular payment that you're getting in from, an attorney or something that you know, but he's not a client, you could actually set them up in tabs as a client and receive payments that way as well. But I find most people are making annual journal entries, and they just don't know how to tie that together. So just by clicking that receipt, you can make that happen. Paul?
Very good. I will point out that we probably wouldn't be posting that to rent expense, but instead to rent income. But
correct.
we didn't have a rent
account.
Income account, so we used our rent expense account. I am going to talk about something totally different. I'm going to go over here to PracticeMaster, and I'm going to go into the calendar, and I'm going to create a calendar entry for today. This is demo data, so today to my demo system is November 17, 2009, and I'm going to create it for 9 o'clock to 10 o'clock, add an event, and I want to create this event for the estate planning group. Now, you go into this box here, and you can select whoever it is. Now, let's say the estate planning group is Kathy, Cheryl, and Dan. I can go ahead and check Kathy, Cheryl, and Dan, but the problem with that is, in order to do that, I have to know, A, who's in the estate planning group, and B, I have to be on top of that changing. If we get a new attorney, and I'm not sure whether or not that new attorney practices estate planning. I know he does a lot of workers' comp, but I'm not sure. I think he does a little estate planning too. I don't know whether or not he's one of the people that should be included in this. Now, of course, I'm assuming here in this example that I've only set up people. And what we're talking about today is the ability in the setup screens to also set up groups. So I can set up a group called estate planning and put whoever I want into it, and I can change that as that group changes. We might have a group called attorneys. We might have a group called partners. We might have a group called staff or paralegals or golfers if you have a golf team, whatever suits your purposes. And you can add and delete people from that group at will as somebody leaves the golf team or leaves the firm and of course isn't in any of the groups anymore, or comes into the firm and he may be in the estate planning group, he's a partner, he's also an attorney, and he's also in the workers' comp group. That means then that when I go in to schedule this, I would simply choose that group. Now I'm going to cancel out of this because I don't have the estate planning group. I'm going to show you how this is done, and then we're going to come back and take a look at it. Now, the other scenario is there are things that sometimes need to be scheduled. The most obvious is the conference room or the conference rooms. There's also things like projectors or screens or spare laptops that may be used in meetings or may simply be scheduled to be taken off-site by somebody on this day and somebody else on another day. All you need to do is create a user to represent that. You could create a group, but those are really single entities. They aren't groups of people. They are just single things. Now, one reason people don't do this is because they're worried, well, I only have so many users that I can set up in PracticeMaster. Not true. We're going to talk about that too. So we're going to go over here to setup. If you have these buttons, if you're in version 15, I think 14.3 also had them. If you have these buttons, you simply click on the system configuration. If you don't, if you have an older version out on your screen, you probably have a system configuration icon. If you don't, you either aren't supposed to be in there or you simply didn't get it set up, and we can help you set that up. But in the most current versions of the software, you click on the tools, which come up as system configuration, and you end up in here. Now, there are some buttons up here, and this one is users. It's supposed to look like a user ID with somebody's picture on it. And this one is groups, which is supposed to look like a group of user IDs, which implies a group of people. Let's look at that estate planning one first. These are all the individual users within our system. Up here, when we drop this down, we'll see a list of all the already defined groups. You can see we have things like Anderson staff, Jensen staff, Martin staff. Here what we've done in our sample is taken Mr. Martin's staff, which includes Pam, Jen, and Cheryl, or maybe it's Ms. Martin because I think Cheryl is Cheryl Martin, and group them all together so that when we want to schedule something for that entire group of staff people, we can do it. We're going to add one. We're going to add one, and we're going to call it estate planning. Now I can call it EP, I can call it estates, I can call it estate planning, whatever I want, but I only have 8 characters. So I may want to go ESTPLAN. You, of course, want to give it a name that's a little bit representative of what you're doing, but feel free to give it something like EP, because down here then you can put in a full name that will also show up. Now, once you've defined this new group, you simply check the people that are in the group and uncheck the people from the prior one you had up that aren't. So let's say that this is Dan, Cheryl, and Kathy. There we go. We have defined the estate planning group as being Kathy, Cheryl, and Dan. All I have to do now is save it, and I'm done. I go in and look at Jensen. That's Jensen's staff. If I come back and look at estate planning, that's the estate planning group. Now the beauty of this is that you can change it at will. You don't have to have people remember who's in estate planning, especially in a larger firm. This can be difficult. You simply have to set it up, and then whoever administers it, when you get a new estate planning attorney, you add them. When somebody either shifts focus or leaves the firm, you take them out of that group. That's all there is to it. If there had been a whole bunch of things scheduled in the future for the estate planning group, and you have a new attorney that's added to the estate planning group, Mary Jo, help me out here. I'm remembering that maybe you need to take into account that they weren't in there before. Do you? Is that an issue, or do they just automatically get added into the group?
If you're adding somebody new to the group, they will automatically be added on future calendar entries, but it does not go back and add them to existing.
Very good. See, it's not always what you know, it's who you know, and I know Mary Jo, and she knows all the answers. So here we have the estate planning group. We'll go back and use that in a second. Now the other thing I want to show you is we're going to set up the conference room, and we're going to set up the projector as being 2 assets. Now of course you probably have multiple conference rooms, so we're going to set up CR1. We're going to call it CR1, and for username we're going to have conference room 1. Of course you give it a name that's specific to what you want to do. You might give it a password so people can't come in here and mess with it, or so somebody can't log in as conference room, because what you're doing here is you're creating a user. You don't need to give it an email address. You don't need to worry about integration or calendar rights or profiles. You don't have to worry about access profiles. It could be a manager, it could not. But you want to make it not be a login user. See, I just went and said we should give it a password so people can't log in as it. Really what you want to do is merely uncheck login user. That means nobody's going to log in as CR1. That means that it is still active, it can still be scheduled, but it's not something that you're logging in as. Now we're going to go ahead and save this, and we're going to create one more new user, and we're going to call it PRJ, or we could call it projector, because I believe we have 8 characters here. PRJ projector. It also is not a login user, so we don't need to worry about passwords or any of this other stuff. And now we have 2 assets that we can schedule, the conference room and the projector, and we also have a group. Now, while we're here, I'm going to touch on one other subject. George left. Well, we don't have a George. Jason left. Pull him up, make him not a login user, and make him inactive. That's all you need to do to get rid of a user that's not there anymore. Why don't we delete him? Well, Jason may have taken a whole bunch of notes, may have entered fees, may have entered expenses, may have done a lot of different things, and if we delete him, those records are not going to have anybody tied to them anymore. You're not going to be able to tell that Jason took that note, or that was Jason that entered that fee, whether it was his fee or maybe he's a legal assistant and it was his boss's fee. The thing is, you can't just delete a user, because if you do, You're going to disassociate all those records that they created, those notes that they made, those phone records, those emails that they tagged to the system. If you disassociate him from all those records, you're going to add all sorts of data file integrity check errors, and you're going to add a problem later when somebody says, who wrote this note? Who talked to John Doe 2 years ago on Tuesday the 5th of May? I need to know, and the user's gone, so there's no tie, there's no identification. Now, if Jason left and his job was taken over, maybe he's a legal assistant and he was replaced by Sylvia, you can rename a user. And we're going to talk about that in another virtual user group meeting as we get into all the other things that you can do in system configuration and user configuration. But I did want to touch on that because we talked about the login user and creating your assets and not being login users, and that's something I wanted to touch on. So we'll get out of here. We will go back into PracticeMaster. We still have this up. We are going to add a new event. We want the estate planning group to meet in the conference room, and they'll need the projector. So we are going to uncheck the people that were already there. We're going to check estate planning. We need the conference room, and we need the projector. And I think that's it. And now when we create this item, and we don't need Jason. Jason's not in there anymore because I deleted him, so that's why he wasn't showing up in the list. Estate planning, conference room 1, using the projector. Now when we create this event, it's going to be a meeting, and it's from 9 to 10, and we're not going to worry about a client. We're going to save it. And when we're done, we will be able to, now we don't have an important item set here. Should have checked this, where we combine multiple user records into one. There we go. Now we know that the estate planning group, which contains these 3 people, is also using the projector and conference room. So if we go in now and tell it we want to look at when the conference room is available by simply checking the conference room as what we're going to include here, and we're going to get Jason out of there. I should have deleted him, creating problems for myself. We can now look at the conference room and see when it's being used. And we can now look at the projector and see when it's being used. And both of those things are being used at this time. So we now have assets, and we now have groups of people that we can schedule within the calendar and be able to tell when the conference room is available, be able to tell when the projector is available, be able to schedule things for different groups of people without having to go in and remember who's on the staff, who's a paralegal, who's a partner, who's an associate, who's in estate planning. We now have those groups. Any questions? Okay, very good. Mary Jo has a special thing that she learned. Every once in a while, each of us, Mary Jo and I, will learn something new that maybe the other one knew, but we didn't. And we think it's the neatest thing in the world, and it's always disappointing, and this happened to Mary Jo. She goes, well, wait till you see what I learned. And I looked at it and I said, well, I knew about that. But this is something really neat that she discovered a couple weeks ago, and she's going to tell you about it. Mary Jo?
Okay. I'm just going to go into tab. I got to close everything because this is an exclusive thing. When you first get your program and you open it up and you have to do all of your initial setup, over in customization, there are some screens here that you go through and set up. And this first screen here where it has profession customization has some labels here. And out of the box it's called, client, phone 1, phone 2, phone 3, these labels, and you can name them whatever you want. Some, people don't want to call their clients clients. Maybe they want to call them customers. I don't know. Maybe they don't want it to be cellular phone. They want it to be cell phone. Or office, they want it to be work phone. You have the ability to change these labels. And what I discovered in here is when, maybe you don't want to call your timekeepers, you want to call them attorneys. So if you come in here and you change this to attorney, it not only changes that, I'm going to save that, it not only changes it on the bill and on all the other places that it has timekeeper or things like that, it also changes it on your report. Like if I come in here now, instead of having a timekeeper report, I have an attorney analysis or attorney productivity. Before these all said timekeeper analysis, timekeeper productivity. So when you change that, you change not only the name of the description, but throughout the whole program, you change that information. If I come into the client screen and I go to the setup, it no longer says report order for the timekeepers. It says it for attorneys. So just by changing that one word, it changes it throughout all the programs for me. And so now in tabs, I can go in and I can see all these different names that I created. So it was just a cute little, fun little tip I saw, and I thought it was interesting because I had a client wanting to know, how to do a timekeeper productivity report, and it said attorney, and she couldn't find it. So that was why someone had changed those customization tabs, and instead of timekeeper, it now said attorney. So that's my little tidbit for the day.
Very good. Okay, any questions? Don't see any. So that concludes our June 2010 virtual user group meeting that we, of course, affectionately call the water cooler. Join us next month. I think we also have a webinar coming up a week from today on using the calendar in PracticeMaster, the difference between events and tasks, how to use alarms, how to use reminders, how to set up multiple reminders that go beyond the scope of the 3 that are in there. A lot of neat information on how to get very nitty-gritty in using the calendar and the calendar functions in PracticeMaster. That's next Tuesday at 1 o'clock, a week from today. So have a good afternoon, everybody. Thanks for joining us, and we'll see you soon. Bye-bye.